Homogenization, the process of making things similar. This is something that people have long since complained about happening in FF14. It's a valid, and sometimes outright correct assessment. A number of things get sanded down and made similar to everything else. The issue with this is, the very valid take is another of the things people have no nuance with. Every job plays the exact same now, is a way too commonly said thing. It takes the very reasonable arguments you can make and pushes it into a genuinely bad faith place. In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about job evolution over the years, how it relates to homogenization, then springboard to today, and how genuinely terrible the arguments have gotten. Especially the every job plays the same argument, since it is so beyond reasonable criticism that I really can't even pretend to fairly touch it. It is unfair by its own measure. If you like the video, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Support me on my socials and learn about my new Project Moon obsession that swallowed weeks of my life. Let's go into the video. I've talked about Dragoon a lot over the years as a Dragoon main. I have an entire video about it, and why I like the job, and why I feel the Nostrand change to only one charge was bad. I summarized Dragoon as always being a job about OGCD management. Back in A Realm Reborn, Dragoon was a job that kinda sucked. We had a skill called Heavy Thrust that lasted pretty deep into the game's life. You had to start your rotation with it, since you would gain a buff for one go-through of both combos. Chaos Thrust combo, then True Thrust combo. The same as it is today. Heavy Thrust had a positional too. In A Realm Reborn, if you missed the positional, you just did not get the buff. That was removed, thankfully. We also had no magic defense. Notice how all jobs have about the same defense across both stats? This wasn't true of Dragoon back at launch. Dragoon ended up dying even more because the magic defense didn't exist. So even when the game came out, gear differences were already a problem and people wanted it gone. Otherwise, Dragoon's base rotation has remained fundamentally unchanged over the whole 10 years. We lost Heavy Thrust, gained a 4th and 5th combo hit via Fang and Claw and Wheeling Thrust, but kept the linear rotation. That isn't to say we didn't get more changes though, like how Disembowel lost its unique piercing buff and gained the Heavy Thrust buff instead, or how our two combos used to be completely separate. Heavy Thrust was our pivot point between the combos, rather than True Thrust. If you hit True Thrust, you were forced onto the Full Thrust combo route. I call it a pivot point because double Full Thrust combos is a thing we still do today. If the boss would die, or otherwise become immune to damage before Chaos Thrust's dot would become worth it, we would pivot the rotation with no penalty. It's a GCD you could mentally reset at. Our jumps meanwhile all took a full GCD window. You could not double weave no matter what. It would clip your GCD very hard. It's Stardiver, but a little less awful since Stardiver essentially always clips your GCD anyway. We also had Spine Shatter Dive, meaning we had 3 jumps that would fully consume a weaving window. Back in these days, it was common to hear people complain that the animation locks of Dragoon were super deadly and awful and terrible. And that's why they're gone. It was not a criticism of Dragoon players, it was a criticism of the job. It was one I heard non-stop, to quite an annoying degree. You know what I called it? A skill issue. Dragoon's animation locks were not anywhere near that bad. Stardiver sucks purely for GCD clipping reasons, not because it locks you. Enemy cast bars have always been a thing, simply don't use a jump at the end of a cast. Though again, this wasn't the popular sentiment. Even among some raiders, I would hear this sort of comment, always framed as a complaint, not a fact of the job. This is the first example of homogenization I am using for the ultimate conclusion of the video. Stay tuned for that. Otherwise, Dragoon's changes and evolutions have been within Blood of the Dragon. In Heavensward, you had to measure out your Geskolgel uses to try and get 3 per minute. This became more automatic with the 3 per minute job being offloaded to Nostrand in Life of the Dragon, and 3 within 30 seconds, each with a 10-second cooldown. This then became the Nostrand we have now. 3 charges to use without any real cooldown. That is, until Dawntrail stupidly removed 2 charges, and actively went against the design of the job we've had for 10 years. I miss my wife tales. Speaking of piercing buffs, this is an element we have phased out. Piercing, blunt, and slashing debuffs used to be a major component in party compositions. Well, it sort of was. If you were bringing a bard or machinist along, most groups would by default bring a Dragoon. All of their damage was piercing, so Dragoon would be buffing the range DPS by 10% permanently. Of course, it wasn't required. There were still groups who had 2 non-Durg melee or other compositions. The range would probably loudly beg for a Dragoon though. It was also likely you brought a ninja because of a slashing buff. All tanks benefited from a slash debuff. Warrior I believe had one too, but if you didn't have a warrior, well, ninja. Beyond that, if you had both, guess what happened next? The two would argue on who takes the DPS loss to put up the slashing debuff first. Obviously, the warrior would lose most of the time. Blunt debuff was there too. This all kinda goes against balance now, doesn't it? If you have jobs be fine without the debuffs, they become overly strong with it. If they're balanced with the debuff, they're underpowered without it. Especially with how many jobs there are now, how do you properly balance the jobs with this in mind? Jobs in general evolve to not need these, or turn the buffs into personal buffs. Though this point is more a general game evolution, kind of important though. Let's talk Bard next. Ranged was more of a support role in ARR and Heavensward. You had 2 songs that really made a huge difference, a TP song and an MP song. For those who don't know, we used to have a physical version of MP called TP. It was even capped at 1000, similar to how we have 10,000 MP now. Which back then, MP could vary and would affect Black Mage's rotation without piety melds. Naturally, the TP song would restore everyone's TP, and MP song would regen MP. In exchange, your own damage was cut. Also, there was the damage buff song, hint hint for openers. All of these used your MP. Being a resource battery was a really useful tool though, especially for prog. Machinist was also given these sorts of battery bonuses, but we're focusing on Bard. Ever since Stormblood, we have had the same song rotation system. The only difference is how we're on a 2-minute meta instead of a 3-minute one. The changes of Bard have otherwise been minor in the grand scheme of things. They matter, don't get me wrong, but it isn't the level of changes from the first 3 expansions. Beyond the support role, Bard was really basic in ARR. We didn't have nearly as many OGCDs to use, and Iron Jaws didn't exist. We had to just manually reapply every dot. Heavensward levels are the levels we always got Iron Jaws. What we also got in Heavensward was Bow Mage and Gun Mage. These lasted for only the expansion because nobody liked it. Well, there's a few people who did, but it was widely unpopular. It massively changed the job to be entirely different to what it was. Even the basic rotation felt entirely different with how casting affected it. Sounds like the reverse of Summoner these days now, doesn't it? Except with Summoner, the changes were taking it away from what was otherwise widely complained about. Bow Mage could be turned on and off as the fight demanded it, so it isn't like it was a passive. The need to swap though was just not the greatest at times. Back then, I tried really hard to learn and enjoy the job, since I really enjoyed the ARR levels of it. I could not though. I just did not enjoy it. I was probably among the voices asking for it to go back, which we never did. We evolved to what Bard is today. Again, simplifying quite a bit, but going over every minor detail of evolution defeats the point of the wider game. Before I get to that talk of Summoner, let's take a detour to the talk of Samurai. That's a much more recent job than the ones I'm focusing on today, yet it's one of the most hotly debated because of one skill, Kiten. If you know me much, you know my stance. Let's start at the beginning, Stormblood Samurai. Widely, Stormblood Samurai is the same job as it is today, with most all changes being on the kinky end. The skills we've lost since then are mostly the 3 main ones of Saigon, Hagakure, and Kiten. Ikishoten was also added in future. Saigon was a reverse third eye boost. It was a cheaper version of Shinten that only was usable on a proc. We get a bonus 10 Kenki instead of a 10 Kenki cheaper Shinten. It was also slightly stronger. Hagakure, you might be confused as we still have the skill, so let's quick mention Kiten. Kiten would give a 50% boost in power to your next GCD. This included EI Jutsu, so you would Kiten every EI Jutsu. You just always did it no matter what. Yet what if I told you that Kiten wasn't your strongest Kenki iteration, and it was weaker than Shinten when used for Midare. That's where Hagakure stepped in. A concept that was extremely difficult to explain to people was how the math worked out. I will attempt that here. Let's take the otherwise weakest Kenki spender in Shinten. It cost 25 Kenki for 300 potency back then. Kenki is generated at 5 per tick, let's call it. So Shinten is 5 ticks of Kenki. Divide 300 by 5 to get 60 potency per tick of Kenki. This is the floor you have to beat to surpass Shinten. Midare Setsugeka was 720 potency, so Kiten would boost it by 360 potency. It cost 20 Kenki, or 4 ticks, for 90 potency per Kenki tick. Wait, that's so big! How could you make it up? Well, Hagakure was not a utility move in these days. It was a longer cooldown of 40 seconds you would use on cooldown. It had the same effect though, Purge your Sen for Kenki. The difference was it was 20 Kenki per Sen, or 60 when at 3 Sen. Let's assume you spent all of that Kenki on additional Shintens. 60 Kenki is 12 ticks of Kenki, multiplied by the 60 potency for a Shinten tick. That's a gain of 720 potency, the same amount of damage as a Midare alone. But you lost the Midare, right? Yes, but in exchange for it, you gained a different GCD. Let's even just take Hakaze, which at worst was a 150 potency hit. We're up to 870 potency here. This is without needing to spend 20 Kenki on Kiten as well. The 1080 potency of a Midare came at the cost of 20 Kenki. Hagakure converted the raw potency of Midare into Kenki, which now made it into an OGCD resource. No opportunity cost like a GCD takes. As such, to make things equal, let's convert that 20 Kenki we didn't spend on Kiten into extra Shinten Kenki. That's another 240 potency, for a grand total 1110 potency when using Hagakure instead of a Kiten Midare. It also gets better if you use it multiple times. A third Hagakure use is 720 potency, plus the 240 potency not spent on Kiten, plus a Gecko or a Kasha, which back then was 440 potency, for a total 1400 potency. That's a 320 potency gain over the Kiten Midare. Also, the fact that it took me way too long to find these numbers is why I structure my guides like I do. Come hell's or high water. The ultimate cherry on top of this sundae was the 40-second cooldown. Even in the current 2-minute meta, that's at most 3 per full opener. It massively complicated things rotationally, since a perfect cycle wasn't so simple. Different GCD speeds would get further into combos after the Hagakure cooldown would end. Maybe get to a Midare too early, or way too late depending on your viewpoint. Gutting Hagakure to instead give us Iki Shoten massively changed our relationship with the rotation and Kenki. Iki Shoten is essentially just the Pepsi of Hagakure. It gives you 10 less on a very long cooldown, and essentially is saved just for Senai or Garen, which we did have Garen in those days, which was on a 2-minute cooldown. So you had to balance having enough for Garen, but had to constantly stay low enough so Hagakure wouldn't overcap you with how easy it was to do, yet not spend it too early on Shinten so you could Kiten on Midare and Higanbana on those refreshes. You had to be very in tune with how long your rotation took to know if you should Shinten for a Hagakure, or hold it because you need to Kiten the Midare. Do you all see why I say Kiten doesn't need to come back now? Like, come on now, when it's a 100% guarantee you're going to Kiten the Midare, you don't need to think about it and have no reason to overspend. You don't need to worry about overcapping either, since Iki Shoten is a slightly longer cooldown at 1 minute, less Kenki, doesn't care anywhere near as much about where you are in your rotation when it comes up, doesn't mess with the overall rotation, and is entirely accounted for every other use thanks to Garen. Yeah, Kiten isn't the core of the issue, guys. It was over the moment we lost Hagakure. Samurai's evolution has not been as much of a slow decline away from Kenki as people act. Hagakure was a load-bearing skill that led to everything that came after. We can criticize the direction of the job design all we want, but when the biggest fans of the job can't even point at how massive Hagakure was, to instead Leonardo point at Kiten? Yeah, no. Forest for the trees at its finest. Ultimately, I feel Hagakure's changes were to keep it more in line with a more normal rotation, to keep it on burst windows. This made it overall stronger to align burst windows, instead of being as much about sustain. Burst versus sustain has been a big issue in general, yet Hagakure really made the job what it was. Summoner, meanwhile, isn't one I really played much of in the era of people want this job back, yet I never met anyone from those days who actually talked positively about that job. Maybe I didn't interact with anyway the right people, but all the mains I knew seemed to hate playing the job, despite playing it. Here's what the level 80 opener looked like back then. I think my key was blue being single weave, red a double weave, and green a GCD. Yeah, Summoner. Pets used to actually be more involved back then. Titan was a tank pet in A Realm Reborn and A Realm Reborn only. Garuda was the ranged pet. Ifrit was the melee pet, though where possible you would stick to Ifrit since he was overall stronger. Summoner was also focused on dots, kind of like ARR Bard in that you had to manually refresh your dots, and it was a major focus. Whoa, hang up, I thought being the same was a bad thing! I'm being facetious there. Honestly, this is probably the job I had the least experience with. Pretty sure I actually leveled Scholar up instead of Summoner in those days. Despite that, it's the prime example of things changing with time. It wasn't a gradual shift, it was sudden and immediate, especially when Dawntrail changed literally nothing. It's a much more interesting look to see a Realm Reborn Summoner evolve into its final form with Shadowbringers. Endwalker really is its own new job entirely. Not quite a brand new job is Black Mage. The homogenization of cast times is a huge deal to a lot of people, yet there was some weirdness I noticed with complaints. Setting aside how it changed and all that, we have Enochian. Before the changes, I'd often see from Black Mages that dropping Enochian is just skill issue, it's not something you'd actually care about. Honestly, it reminded me how I said Blood of the Dragons removal didn't matter, because that never dropped either without a boss force downtime. The skill had changed too much from what it was in Heavensward. The final iteration didn't matter. Yet after the change, some of those names changed their tune to how Enochian was this huge skill and so important, and the essential removal of it is so bad and Obviously, there's two different groups involved in the wider discussion there, but I am thinking of a specific name or two that made these two arguments themselves. The swapping of their tune is the weird part. Black Mage has always been a turret mage, aiming to move as little as possible. It still is. It's just a lot easier to do so. Even after these changes, Black Mage is probably the job that still resembles its ARR counterpart the most. Still resembles its Heavensward evolution the most, though that took a hit with how Fire is completely worthless after Fire 4 now. Though on that end, I posed a question in my Black Mage video. Did Black Mage need these changes to keep up with the new raids? I said it didn't look like it. After something like the Tyrant though, is that still the case? Or do the people who've stuck with Black Mage after all this think that pre-changes Black Mage would have been drowning? The other things people focus on are the tank and healer jobs. That is another one where people massively oversell how bad things have gotten. Right now, White Mage essentially has 2 DPS buttons. Back then, we had 3 DPS buttons, ooh! But, like, seriously, it never had that many buttons. Healer DPS has always been incredibly basic. The people who say they would like that 3rd button back, I'm on board with. The people who act like healers had this whole giant kit, I can't even with. The difference was the existence of Cleric Stance. For A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, yes, only 2 parts of the game, Cleric Stance would swap your int stat with your mind stat. Healer damage scaled off of int instead of mind like today. So you would need to pick one, have good damage or have good healing. Certain abilities might bypass this healing debuff, but otherwise you sucked at heals with it up. This was a major risk and reward thing. The cooldown being 10 seconds also played a major factor. Ultimately though, the problem was if you fat-fingered or double-pressed it. Consider the game servers were actually a lot worse back then. You could turn off Cleric Stance and immediately turn it back on just because you hit it twice. Guess what that means if your tank was wall-to-walling? A short trip to Wipe Town. I personally don't miss it for reasons like this. The queuing system often worked to its detriment here. You really need to get the skill off, but the button didn't seem to register. Nope, it did, just slowly, and now you just put it back up. Annoying and dumb. Maybe slightly retooling it could be okay, or maybe a healer dedicated to Cleric Stance. I don't know, but I don't want it. Scholar, the issues run a little deeper, but not by much. Scholar did have a few more buttons, lots of dots because Summoner existed. The two jobs used to share a lot more of a toolkit, where these days they could split the jobs entirely and you wouldn't know the difference. The main problem here is that the power of energy drain is far lower than it used to be. It's barely that much more damage than if you ignored it. It used to actually regen MP too, meaning it could keep you going in exchange for less ether flow heals and shields. Raising that dead person for mechanics prog was more important than surviving the damage afterwards. Again though, this isn't really homogenizing. It isn't making it any similar to White Mage. It falls more into quality of life that crosses the line into being too easy. Etherflow giving the full MP restore instead of the resource spending. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I think the distinction matters. Less of homogenizing in general is how they homogenize Scholar into itself. Eos and Selene used to be different summons, but like, Selene was not as cool. She had an AoE speed buff for openers, which people often complained about speed buffs with how rotations were messed with, and an AoE Esuna. AoE Esuna is extremely niche, borderline worthless before it was removed. Now Eos is the Highlander, and AoE Esuna has seen a lot more potential uses. Astrologian is an entire other can of worms, but works as a springboard into the final topic. Astro started out as more of a time mage. We had a skill called Time Dilation, which added, I believe, 15 seconds to beneficial effects on the target. So if you gave someone the balance, they would get even more time with it. Cards were awesome too. Each card had a near distinct effect. The balance was a straight damage up. The arrow was a GCD speed boost, so imagine Monk with a speed buff on. The spear I think actually had a weird one. It was an OGCD cooldown reducer, similar to the first era of Lilies. Arguably just as useless, but potentially more so because of burst timers. The bow was a defense buff. The ewer was MP regen. The spire was TP regen. Remember, melee MP. What was truly cool was the ability to burn your cards and store one. Storing one simply meant being able to use it later. Store the balance for burst windows. Burning a card with the Royal Road would give one of 3 effects. Burning the balance or bowl would double the potency of the next played card. Burning spear or arrow would double the timer. Burning the ewer or spire would actually cut the power in half. In exchange, it became a party-wide AoE. The shorthand for this AoE was a spread buff. That's so cool, right? You do so much with the cards in terms of planning ahead, instead of just constantly throwing cards at RNG for the seal system we got with the next iteration of cards, or the consistent groupings like with current cards. Ultimately, this is why we can't have nice things. Despite the fact that I could literally thank an AoE spread of the bowl for giving me my first ever ultimate clear, players ultimately boil down the entire job to, can you get the spread balance? This is a sentiment I heard a lot, both from casual and hardcore players. I absolutely wish it was just the speedrunners and parsers, but no. Somehow, spread balance was the only interaction that mattered. An emergency TP or MP battery after deaths? Worthless. An OGCD shortcut? Yeah, actually bad. GCD speed boost? Okay, that one was bad too. An extra 5% party-wide damage reduction? Yep, garbage to everyone. Not only is this ultimately a nightmare to balance, but players boil everything down to just damage. No matter how many support things we brought back, the damage output is all people would look at. Look at how much people have turned on Verays. I've seen that get shit on so much in more recent years. The prog benefits don't matter, because there are none. You can't save a pool by spamming Verays, nope, not at all. Should just simply get the mechanics right the first try, then it doesn't matter. Maybe I'm just surrounded by crazy people, including myself, but it's genuinely a sentiment I've seen more than once. That's how bad it has gotten. Doesn't matter how safe it could make things with dragging bodies across the finish line, or making raid wides no longer a danger, the damage loss is overtaking a less utility, more damage job is all that matters. Is it because we're no longer in the era where we had something like Dragon Kick and Delirium? Monk and Dark Knight were good to choose in the Heavensward era, almost guaranteeing one of them had a slot if you didn't have the other. Both of these skills would lower the int of the boss. Magic damage is the ultimate evil of raid wides, so a permanent lowering of those would be nice, right? These days, I don't think it would be welcomed anymore. Make it a bonus on a job that is equal in damage, you'd just meta slot that job to get both. Make it weaker DPS-wise? Well, you don't need the extra defense to survive the raid wides, bring something with higher damage. Make it required to have that extra defense? It's once again a meta pick, or every job is going to have some kind of utility like that. They want every party comp to be viable, so you can't tune with it in mind. Which again makes Astro hell to balance. You need to be able to clear without balance spam. But if Astro's personal damage is trash, you're going to make it up with balance existing. At that point, just do more balance spam and... yeah, lose-lose. This brings me to the conclusion I've had for a long time now. Homogenization is not a boogeyman. It's actually good in a lot of cases. In other cases, it's something players constantly asked for. Let's go back to Dragoon and those animation locks. The animation locks have been sanded down into being near entirely gone, except for Stardiver. The common sentiment was that the locks were bad, because pressing it at a bad time would kill you. This is a fault of the job, not the player. Common sentiment says that removing the animation lock is a good thing. Dragoon is bad because of animation locks. Remove locks, Dragoon now good. Obviously, I'm not talking meta power, since Dragoon has often been very strong to outright meta for most of its life. But that's the kind of mental process that gets us to how we are now. Dragoon was the only job with animation locks on the level it had, the next closest thing being Ninja and Assassinate, which that also got killed off because people seem to find any animation lock that isn't a gap closer as well is automatically bad and must be removed. It's a mental process that continues with Reaper. Death's design is complained about for a lot of the same reasons Heavy Thrust was. It's not a matter of making Reaper gauge positive or such. People just really hate putting the skill on at all. It's a debuff to manage, one you don't even put that much effort into. People want this skill fucking shot in a back alley somewhere. They want, say it with me everyone, homogenization. Anyone asking for the removal of Death's design wants, again, homogenization. Full stop. That's what it does. It makes the basic GCD rotation of Reaper even more similar to how many jobs have a 1-2-3 combo. Death's design breaks this combo up on top of all the other tools that break us out. No matter what though, simply asking for the skill to be removed is flat out homogenizing the job. It removes something unique about it. A skill that the other melee do not deal with. This is an argument for Kiten I haven't seen either. People frame it as the last brain cell you needed to play Samurai fine. Not, it actually made the job unique. The closest comparison these days is how Dragoon would always buff Full Thrust with Life Surge. The differences between Life Surge and Kiten are numerous though, so I wouldn't dare say the jobs are the same for sharing a similar thought process there. Back to the homogenization though. This is an aspect that the loudest voices often just seem to not pay attention to. They complain that all the tanks are the exact same because each of them is a 1-2-3 filler. So let's make Reaper also a simple 1-2-3 filler because I don't like Death's design. Yes, really, multiple people have said that to me. I've even had it happen in my streams. People saying how bad the homogenization is, then turning around and saying we need to remove something that makes a job unique. What do you think about the 14 8.0 prediction to bring back job identities? Every job has the same 1-2-3 rotation is a blatant lie? You feel Death's design makes the whole job awkward? I feel like Reaper would be stupid without Death's design. I like Death's design. Fun fact, it objectively makes the job different. Also, like, let's be real, Death's design has been part of the job since it came out. That's not a matter of, oh, every job plays the same. That's a matter of, this job explicitly plays differently, and people don't like that it plays differently and want it to play the same as everything else. Give me an opinion to let me know I'm not a Square Enix employee. Dancing Green is a terrible fight. Like, I wish I was getting paid Square Enix money. But seriously though, if Death's design is so awkward, why do you want everything to become the same? That awkwardness is what makes it different. And also, I like Death's design. It reminds me of Heavy Thrust, which a lot of people complained about, because it was different. The line isn't whether or not the differences are good or not. Homogenization means making things similar. If Reaper punched you in the face in real life every time you use Death's design, I'm sure everyone would be saying it needs to be homogenized to be like every other job and not punch you in your actual face. Regardless of that being an actually good thing to change, actually provably beneficial homogenizing, it's still homogenizing. Even if Dragoon jumps were truly as bad as people made them out to be, even if everyone actually agreed it's something that needed to be fixed, removing the animation locks and cutting out the weaving space they take just to be a normal OGCD attack is blatantly homogenizing. I don't want Stardiver to lose what remains of that. I wanted to just stop clipping my GCD because I don't play on 2 ping. This is the nuance that I rarely see, if at all. People will whine and moan about the homogenization, but ignore the job evolution that came with it. The evolution that was often asked for. Do I need to remind you all again about the 49-second Warrior opener? No, I don't mean Warrior bursted for 49 seconds. I mean a Warrior trying to be optimal would start a 49-second countdown before they would pull the boss to gain some potency. 49 seconds every pull. Far more than the 16 a Dancer or Samurai currently needs.
There it is, right there. The dream. It's real. We're going to sit here for this minute. No, we're on the pull. No, we're about to pull. We're about to pull.
But hey, that was different, so it's a good thing we had it, right? I'm not saying all homogenization is good either. Not all changes are good. Again with Dragoon and Reaper, I think jumps shouldn't have been made so free just because plays were bad. I think removing Death's design without some other fundamental change along with it is a stupid thought. I had the same argument for Heavy Thrust being removed when everyone was constantly asking for that. What do you know, they combined Dragoon's combos into one combo tree to maintain the pivot point aspect of Heavy Thrust. Though with Death's design, I don't even know what we'd add in its place that isn't just the same as something other jobs have anyway. Kinda like how Dragoon was the only job with 2 distinct combo paths, so combining them into one was actually double homogenization to make up for the Heavy Thrust part being a bad call. Astro's main gimmick was gutted to be all damage cards with the seal system, and now the current system which is a bit closer to Stormblood. Not only was this homogenization asked for, it was probably actively healthy for balance. A run where Astro really did just spam spread balance would destroy all DPS checks alone. In this 2-minute meta, probably even more so. Piercing and such buffs being removed again made for easier balance, and massively reduced how tight a noose would be around specific jobs. There might be a good few comps you could go for thanks to what jobs do or do not get the ability to place the debuffs, yet that still locks you into those specific comps. Or you're just leaving damage on the floor. The topic of tanks is one where I feel they have a bit of a point, but still also no. Stormblood launch, Warrior had a huge penalty in stance swapping. If you swapped stances with Gage, the amount you had would be cut in half. So if you had a full 100 gauge, it would be cut to 50 on a stance swap. Warriors made a huge stink over this. The penalty was swiftly dropped. It was factually a difference that was homogenized away, but was good homogenization to every warrior main in essence. It probably was just objectively a good removal. The main place where there's a point is the main rotation. The differences between them are very minor, with Gunbreaker being the odd man out and feeling quite different. I feel the burst phases of the tanks are all different enough. Warrior, Dark Knight, and Gunbreaker stealing a Diet Requiescat for themselves is a bit not great though. I definitely think the Lionheart combo should have continuation. This is also completely glossing over the removal of stance dancing. You could make a whole video series on that topic. I think we should have a tank dedicated to stances. The biggest threat to the all jobs play the same crowd is the mages and ranged. Summoner is constantly joked to be a ranged job now, because it has almost no casting. Yeah, that plays exactly the same as Red Mage, right? A job people say is the least mobile of the mages now, and has double the button count. It sure plays just like Pictomancer, which constantly stops to cast things that do literally 0 damage, and even has a cast just to use an OGCD. The range jobs, meanwhile, please tell me how Bard, Machinist, and Dancer are the same. Please, I dare you. Do it without boiling down the entire rotation to, they both press buttons. Only one of these jobs have anything close to hypercharge windows. Only one of these jobs have anything close to the dance steps. Only one of these jobs have to balance dot timers with a constant stance swap timer. Only 2 of these have anything proc-based. These jobs are so far apart from each other, and I would never argue any of the other jobs outside the role play similarly either. The closest you get is Pictomancer having downtimes like Dancer, and the context is entirely different. For every point you could pull up with the tanks, the fact that some people include the range jobs destroys their entire point. The Black Mage changes are homogenizing, yes. It plays just like other mages is a statement I would never get behind. Yet it's a statement that has been said in my presence. It will probably also be said in the comments here. Ultimately though, like I asked earlier, would old Black Mage have survived this tier? Will it survive later tiers in the next expansion? The latter question we won't have an answer till players get to do it, but the point there is whether the homogenizing was good, heavy air quotes, to make sure it could still perform. Would pre-change Black Mage been viable in the heavyweight tier? Some homogenizing is good, no air quotes. It's not all bad. Some of it is minor, sometimes it's huge. Ultimately, homogenizing is an evolution of a job, for better or worse. We need to start keeping that in mind, especially when you get people who will complain about homogenizing, then in the same breath, say we need to homogenize Reaper. I hope you enjoyed this video. Part review of the evolution of jobs, part pointing out how players often asked for these evolutions and got decimated by the monkey's paw. I hope you enjoyed my take on this video idea. If you have your own thoughts on topics you want to see, feel free to suggest them. Otherwise, hi, I am Wesk. You know my opinions by now, I am sure. How's it going? You know this video is scripted, right? Why did I write this outro to act like I was doing it unscripted? I don't know, funny. Anyway, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my other videos for stuff like this and plenty of guides. Come watch my Twitch where I stream lots of different gameplay throughs. I also am on Blue Sky. If you don't want to follow my stuff, go play Project Moon. Yes, all of it. That includes Lobotomy Corporation. No, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Library of Ruina, yes, if you're bad at deck builders like I am. But yeah, take a break from FF14 if you're angry at it. Other games exist, and this one has some peak writing. One boss fight from Limbus Company single-handedly sold me on the entire series, so, it's that good. Yeah, I'm rambling. Feel free to give more context for how certain jobs played in the comments. I didn't even go into how Ninja's Mudra used to be OGCD. That fucking sucked, didn't it, everyone? Take care, and may the power of an ended hog stay waste to your enemies.